In a small frontier town where a woman's worth was measured by her husband, Celia Caldwell had become the subject of whispers and sidelong glances. At 40, unmarried and seemingly resigned to spinsterhood, she weathered the town's judgment with quiet dignity. The same couldn't be said for Swift Arrow, the Apache warrior whose name alone caused young women to blush and married men to stand taller. Respected by enemies, desired by maidens, he moved between two worlds with uncommon grace. What would drive such a man to publicly declare his intentions toward the woman the town had deemed unworthy? Would Martha's fragile heart risk the greatest leap of faith when the town that mocked her suddenly envied her instead? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Broken Springs wasn't much to look at, just a collection of wooden buildings stretched along a dusty main street, with the church steeple standing tallest against the vast Arizona sky. But what the town lacked in grandeur, it made up for in opinions. Plenty of them. The bulletin board outside the general store told the real story of Broken Springs. Wedding announcements, births, and social gatherings, all carefully pinned in place by Mrs. Abernathy, who treated the task with the solemnity of a sacred duty. Not once in 15 years had Celia Caldwell's name appeared on any invitation worth mentioning. Another Simmons girl getting married, Mrs. Abernathy announced to anyone within earshot as she pinned the latest notice. That's the third one this year. 17 years old and already secured her future. Her eyes found Celia across the street, measuring look that needed no words. Celia adjusted her basket of fabric scraps and continued toward her small shop. The sign above the door read, "Caldwell Fine Stitching," the one thing in town that bore her name with pride. Inside, the familiar smell of cotton wool and beeswax polish greeted her like an old friend. "Morning, Miss Caldwell," young Thomas Fletcher called as he swept the boardwalk in front of his father's hardware store, his voice still caught between boyhood and the man he was becoming. "Ma says to ask when her dress will be ready." "Tell Mrs. Fletcher it'll be finished by Thursday," Celia replied, her voice warm. Children and young people were always easier. They hadn't yet learned to look at her with that mixture of pity and warning, as though spinsterhood might be catching. The bell above her door jangled as she entered her shop, setting her basket on the cutting table. Morning light streamed through the front windows, illuminating the neat rows of fabric bolts, threads arranged by color, and the gleaming Singer sewing machine her father had given her before he passed. Sheriff Miller's wife was due at 10 for a fitting, which gave Celia an hour to work on Mayor Hargrove's daughter's wedding dress. Eliza Hargrove, 22 and marrying the banker's son next month, had made it clear that she expected nothing short of perfection, despite treating Celia with barely disguised disdain during fittings. "Your hands may be the only ones in town skilled enough for French lace," Eliza had said at her last appointment. "But don't think that makes you special." Celia unfolded the nearly completed gown, its pearl beading catching the light. She'd stayed up until midnight, securing each tiny bead, her fingers sore, but her work impeccable. No one could fault her stitches, even if they found plenty to fault about her life. At 40, Celia had long since stopped expecting invitations. She had her shop, her small house at the edge of town, and the respect of those who needed her skills. It was a life she'd built carefully after watching her dreams of marriage crumble at 25. When Thomas Shelby left her for a 17-year-old from the neighboring town. The bell jangled again, and Sarah Mitchell, the doctor's wife and the closest thing Celia had to a friend, stepped inside. Closing the door firmly behind her, "Have you heard the news?" Sarah asked without preamble, her voice hushed despite the empty shop. Celia set aside the wedding dress. "What news would that be?" "The Apache delegation. They're coming to town tomorrow." Sarah's eyes were bright with unusual excitement. "Doctor says the territorial governor arranged it. Some kind of peace negotiation. Here, in Broken Springs." Celia reached for her tea kettle. Sarah's visits always called for tea. Apparently their leader is educated. Speaks English better than half the town council. Sarah removed her gloves, settling into the chair by Celia's workstation. "They say he's spent time in Washington. I'm sure that won't stop the usual talk," Celia remarked, setting the kettle to boil. "Mayor's already called an emergency meeting tonight." "No women allowed, of course." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Though I'd wager you and I could negotiate better terms than those old fools." The mention of Apaches brought a flutter of unease. Celia had never encountered any personally. But the stories, raids on outlying farms, stolen cattle, and worse, had been the backdrop to life in the territory for as long as she could remember. What do they want with Broken Springs? "We're hardly important." Sarah accepted the teacup Celia offered. "Location, I expect. We're between their hunting grounds and the mountains. And with the railroad coming," she let the implication hang. The railroad. Everyone knew what that meant. More settlers, more buildings, less land for those who'd been here first. "Progress," Mayor Hargrove called it. "Well," Celia said finally, "I expect it won't have much to do with me either way." Sarah gave her a curious look over the rim of her teacup. "You never know, Celia. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." Outside, the town continued its morning routine, unaware that by this time tomorrow, everything would change, especially for the woman they'd spent years dismissing as nothing more than a cautionary tale. As dusk settled over Broken Springs, Celia walked the half-mile to her small home on the eastern edge of town. Her cottage stood apart from the others, not quite in town, not quite in the wilderness, much like Celia herself. The key turned in the lock with a familiar resistance. Inside, she lit the oil lamp that cast a warm glow over her private sanctuary. Here, away from judging eyes, Celia allowed her shoulders to relax and her carefully maintained expression to soften. On her mantelpiece sat a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges and swollen with pressed flowers, sketches, and years of private thoughts. She ran her fingers over its cover before gently opening it to a blank page. This journal had been with her for 15 years. A silent confidant that never judged, never whispered, never expected her to be anything but herself. "Another day," she murmured, as she dipped her pen in ink and began to write about the coming Apache delegation. Her handwriting flowed across the page, elegant and precise like her stitches. In these private pages, she could express curiosities and opinions that would raise eyebrows if spoken aloud. After writing, Celia moved to her small kitchen and prepared a simple supper. Unlike many women in town who cooked for hungry families, she'd learned to take pleasure in preparing meals just for herself, a skill born of necessity that had become a quiet act of self-respect. The cottage held other evidences of her solitary life. A single chair pulled close to the fireplace, a bookshelf filled with volumes most frontier women would consider frivolous, and a workbench covered with native plants she'd gathered and dried for remedies. Her mother had taught her about these plants before consumption took her 10 years ago. "The earth provides everything we need to heal," she'd said, guiding Celia's young hands to identify yarrow, echinacea, and wild sage. After her mother's death, Celia had continued collecting and studying, adding her discoveries to her journal and occasionally providing remedies to those townsfolk willing to set aside suspicion for the sake of relief. A soft scratching at the door interrupted her evening ritual. She opened it to find a scraggly orange cat, her only regular visitor. "Right on time, Rusty," she said, setting down a saucer of milk. The cat had appeared 3 winters ago during a snowstorm, half frozen and starving. Now he divided his time between hunting mice in her garden and accepting her hospitality with dignified appreciation. As Rusty lapped at the milk, Celia moved to her bedroom and opened the small cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside lay her most personal treasures, her mother's cameo brooch, her father's spectacles, and beneath them, carefully wrapped in faded blue silk, the silver locket that Thomas Shelby had given her when he'd promised to return from St. Louis with a wedding ring. The locket remained empty. The ring never materialized. Thomas had written a terse letter 6 months later announcing his engagement to Josephine Winters, daughter of a prosperous merchant and 15 years Celia's junior. She no longer felt the sharp pain that once accompanied these memories. Time had dulled it to a resigned acceptance. Still, she kept the locket as a reminder not of Thomas, but of her own resilience. She'd survived the public humiliation, the pitying glances, the subtle shift as people began referring to her as Miss Caldwell, with that particular inflection that designated permanent spinsterhood. From her window, Celia could see the glow of lanterns at the town hall, where men were gathering for the emergency meeting about tomorrow's Apache visitors. Women might not be permitted inside, but their opinions would be shared plenty over wash lines and kitchen tables. Sarah had offered to stop by after the meeting with whatever news her husband might share, but Celia had declined. Whatever decisions were made tonight would reach her soon enough. She turned from the window and prepared for bed, braiding her hair, still mostly brown, with only threads of silver at the temples, and changing into her nightgown. Tomorrow would bring unusual excitement to Broken Springs, but for Celia, it would likely be just another day of careful stitches and measured smiles. As she extinguished the lamp, she couldn't have imagined how wrong that assumption would prove to be, or how the arrival of strangers would stir not just the town, but the carefully ordered patterns of her own solitary existence. Morning brought unusual activity to Broken Springs. Men gathered in small groups outside the barbershop and general store, their voices carrying on the crisp air. Women hurried through errands. Children kept close at hand rather than allowed to roam as usual. Celia opened her shop early, expecting a quiet day with most attention focused on the Apache delegation's arrival. The silver letter opener, a gift from her father, gleamed on her desk where she'd been using it to open packages of new buttons and lace trim. The implement was more ornate than practical, with an eagle's head handle and talon-shaped blade, but it connected her to memories of her father reading correspondence aloud by the fire while she practiced her stitches. The shop bell jangled as Sheriff Miller entered, his expression grim beneath his mustache. "Miss Caldwell," he said, removing his hat. "Mayor Hargrove requests your presence at the welcoming ceremony." Celia set down the shirtwaist she was mending. "My presence? Why would the mayor want me there?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "The delegation includes women. Mayor thinks it would look better if we had some of our own ladies present. Show them we're civilized." "Surely, Mrs. Hargrove, she's indisposed." His tone suggested this was not unusual. The mayor's wife had been indisposed since their son died of fever 3 summers ago. He's asking Mrs. Abernathy and the doctor's wife as well, just to stand quiet like near the courthouse steps when they arrive. Celia considered refusing, but curiosity won out. "What time should I be there?" "Noon, and Miss Caldwell," Sheriff Miller fingered the brim of his hat, "might be best to wear something appropriate. Mayor's particular about appearances today." After he left, Celia closed her shop and returned home to change. She selected her blue Sunday dress, modest, well-made, and the closest thing to formal attire she owned. As she pinned her hair into a neat arrangement, she wondered what Apache women would wear to such a meeting. By 11:30, most of Broken Springs had gathered near the courthouse. Mayor Hargrove, a barrel-chested man with mutton-chop whiskers, paced the wooden boardwalk. The town council stood nearby in their best suits, faces solemn as pallbearers. "Celia, there you are." Sarah Mitchell appeared at her side, dressed in dark green with a matching hat. "Can you believe this circus? Doctor says the mayor nearly worked himself into apoplexy at last night's meeting." "What was decided?" Celia asked. "Precious little. Half want to negotiate for assured safe passage for the railroad surveyors. The other half think any agreement with savages is worthless." Sarah lowered her voice. "Though Jacob, Dr. Mitchell, says their leader is educated back east. Harvard, possibly." Mrs. Abernathy joined them, her narrow face pinched with disapproval. "I don't know why we're entertaining these people at all. My sister in Tucson writes that they massacred a family just last month. Different tribe entirely," Sarah replied calmly. "These are White Mountain Apache. They've been peaceful for years." "Apache is Apache," Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. Mayor Hargrove suddenly called for quiet. In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled riders approaching. The crowd stilled as 7 mounted figures came into view. They rode without saddles, their straight backs and proud bearing a stark contrast to the slouching postures of men who'd spent too many hours at the saloon. 5 men and 2 women, Celia counted. Their clothing was a curious blend of traditional and European, leather leggings and moccasins paired with cotton shirts, one man even sporting a battered cavalry hat. They carried no visible weapons, though Celia suspected this wasn't their full strength. Leading them was a man whose presence commanded attention without effort. Taller than the others, with his long hair secured at the nape of his neck rather than hanging loose like his companions. His face was all angles, high cheekbones, straight nose, and eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the town. "That's him," Sarah whispered. "Swift Arrow." As if hearing his name, the man's gaze swept over the crowd and momentarily caught Celia's. The brief contact sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine. Not fear, though she couldn't name the feeling that replaced it. Mayor Hargrove stepped forward, hands spread in a gesture of welcome that his tight expression contradicted. "On behalf of Broken Springs, I extend greetings to our visitors from the White Mountain tribe." Swift Arrow dismounted with fluid grace. When he spoke, his English was perfect, his deep voice carrying easily to the assembled crowd. "We come in peace to discuss matters that concern both our peoples." His eyes moved deliberately from the mayor to the assembled council. We have traveled far. Perhaps we might first refresh ourselves before beginning our talks." Something in his measured tone suggested he was accustomed to diplomatic niceties, but found them tedious. Celia found herself unexpectedly suppressing a smile. The negotiations moved inside the courthouse, with only the town council admitted. The crowd slowly dispersed, though many lingered nearby, unwilling to miss any developments. Celia returned to her shop, but found herself unable to concentrate on the mending pile that awaited her attention. Mid-afternoon, the shop bell announced Sarah's arrival. Her face was flushed with excitement. "You won't believe what's happening," she said, closing the door firmly behind her. "Jacob slipped out to tell me. They're discussing a formal trading agreement. The Apache have furs, silverwork, and medicines to trade. Mayor Hargrove is beside himself. He wanted to send them away with empty promises, but Swift Arrow brought territorial documents giving them rights to negotiate." Celia threaded her needle. "That explains the mayor's sour expression." "It gets better," Sarah continued. "Swift Arrow asked specifically about local craftspeople. He mentioned needing blankets and winter clothing for his people. Jacob mentioned you immediately." Celia's hands stilled. "Me? Why would he?" The bell jangled again. Both women turned to find Swift Arrow himself filling the doorway, his imposing height emphasized by the low ceiling of the shop. Behind him stood one of the Apache women, her dark eyes watchful. Celia rose, acutely conscious of her workday appearance. Plain brown skirt, white shirtwaist with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Hair beginning to escape its pins after hours of bending over her work. "Mr. Arrow," she said, then hesitated, uncertain of the proper address. A brief smile touched his lips. "Just Swift Arrow will do, Miss Caldwell." His voice was deeper in the confines of the small shop, his accent barely detectable. "Dr. Mitchell suggested your establishment for our requirements." Sarah retreated to a corner, pretending interest in a bolt of calico while watching with undisguised fascination. The Apache woman stepped forward, removing a bundle wrapped in soft leather from her shoulder. She unfolded it on Celia's cutting table to reveal an intricately beaded dress panel. "My sister, Morning Water, wishes to trade," Swift Arrow explained. "She has skill with beadwork, but needs cloth and thread for winter garments." Celia examined the beadwork with professional appreciation. Each tiny bead had been placed with precision, creating a pattern of blues, whites, and yellows that reminded her of summer skies. "This is beautiful work," she said, directing her words to Morning Water. The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. She reached into a pouch at her waist and removed a small object, placing it on the table between them. a carved wooden thimble, its surface worn smooth by years of use. "She offers this as well," Swift Arrow said. "It belonged to our grandmother." Celia picked up the thimble. Unlike the metal ones she used, this was crafted from a single piece of dark wood, its interior perfectly sized to protect a finger. Along its outer surface, tiny stars had been carved with remarkable precision. "She can see you are a woman who creates with her hands," Swift Arrow continued. "Such women were highly respected in our tribe. Since before the Spanish came, the simple acknowledgement of her craft as something worthy of respect rather than a necessity born of spinsterhood caught Celia by surprise. She turned the thimble in her fingers, noting how it had been polished by generations of use. "Please tell your sister I would be honored to trade," Celia said. "What cloth would she prefer?" As Swift Arrow translated, Celia became aware of the growing crowd outside her shop window. Faces pressed against the glass, watching the exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Morning Water pointed to several bolts of fabric, and with Swift Arrow translating, they negotiated quantities and types of thread. Throughout the transaction, Celia found herself unusually conscious of Swift Arrow's presence, the careful way he chose his words, the subtle respect with which he treated both his sister and Celia herself. When the arrangements were complete, Morning Water spoke directly to Swift Arrow, her words flowing musically in their native tongue. "My sister says you have honest eyes," he translated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "She says this is rare among the white women she has met." Celia felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Please thank her for the compliment. And for the thimble. I'll treasure it." As they prepared to leave, Swift Arrow lingered a moment. "The council has invited us to share a meal tomorrow evening. Will you be attending, Miss Caldwell?" Before Celia could respond, Mayor Hargrove appeared in the doorway, his face darkening at the scene within. "There you are," he said to Swift Arrow, pointedly ignoring Celia. "The council is waiting to finalize terms." Swift Arrow's expression revealed nothing as he inclined his head toward Celia in a gesture of farewell. "Until tomorrow, perhaps." As they departed, Sarah emerged from her corner, eyes wide. "Celia Caldwell," she whispered, "I do believe you've made an impression." Word traveled quickly through Broken Springs. By evening, Celia's encounter with the Apache visitors had transformed into something scandalous in the telling. She felt the change immediately upon entering the general store, where conversations halted and eyes followed her progress down the aisles. "Heard you had special customers today," Mr. Finch said as he measured out sugar for her order, his tone carefully neutral while his eyes sparked with curiosity. "Just business," Celia replied, keeping her voice steady. "They needed cloth." "Cloth today, who knows what tomorrow," Mrs. Peterson muttered from nearby, loud enough to be heard. "Giving away our trade secrets to savages." Celia paid for her purchases and left quickly, the weight of judgment heavier than her basket of goods. The painted wooden sign hanging above her shop door, Caldwell Fine Stitching in elegant blue lettering, had never felt more like a declaration of independence than when she stepped beneath it, closing the door on the town's whispers. But even her shop no longer felt entirely secure. Throughout the afternoon, people found excuses to stop by, some with genuine mending needs, others barely disguising their desire for gossip. "What was he like, really?" asked young Jenny Williams as Celia pinned the hem of her Sunday dress. "Pa says they're little better than animals. But Mrs. Mitchell told my ma this one went to college back east." "He seemed well-educated and respectful," Celia answered carefully, her attention seemingly on the straight pins she was placing. "Is it true he gave you some kind of Indian love token?" Jenny persisted. Celia nearly pricked herself. "His sister traded a thimble for cloth. Nothing more." By closing time, Celia's nerves were frayed from the constant scrutiny. She locked up early and took the long way home, avoiding the busier streets where she might be cornered for more interrogation. Sarah was waiting on her porch, a covered basket in hand. "I brought dinner," she said, rising to greet Celia. "Figured you might not want to brave the cafe tonight. Inside." As they set out chicken and biscuits on Celia's small table, Sarah recounted the wilder rumors already circulating. "Mrs. Abernathy is telling anyone who'll listen that you were speaking their language and plotting something," she said, breaking a biscuit in half. "And Eliza Hargrove is claiming the savages specifically sought you out because you live alone on the edge of town." Celia shook her head. "All because I sold some fabric?" "All because Swift Arrow looked at you like you were worth seeing," Sarah corrected. "And because you didn't faint or call for the sheriff when he did." After Sarah left, Celia sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching darkness settle over the scrubland beyond her garden. Her thoughts kept returning to the wooden thimble now nestled in her sewing basket. Such a simple object, yet it had somehow altered the town's perception of her within hours. A flicker of movement near her garden gate caught her attention. Celia leaned closer to the window, expecting to see Rusty making his evening rounds. Instead, a shadowy figure retreated hastily toward the road. Someone had been watching her house. Sleep came fitfully that night. Near dawn, Celia woke to the sound of something sliding beneath her front door. She lit a lamp with trembling hands and found a folded piece of paper on the floor. The note contained no signature, just 5 words scrawled in crude, deliberate letters. "Know your place, or else." She sat at her kitchen table until sunrise, the threatening note before her. In 15 years as the town's spinster, she had experienced pity, dismissal, and occasional cruelty, but never outright threat. What troubled her most was the realization that she wasn't entirely afraid. Beneath her concern flickered something unfamiliar, a spark of defiance. The town had long ago decided her place, defined the narrow boundaries of her existence. Now someone feared she might step beyond them. Perhaps they were right to worry. When morning came, Celia did something she hadn't done in years. She removed her best dress from its protective wrappings, a deep burgundy wool with subtle black piping that she'd made 3 years ago, but rarely had occasion to wear. The council dinner would include most of Broken Spring's prominent citizens. Normally, she would have worn something deliberately understated, designed to blend into the background. Not tonight. She placed the dress carefully on her bed, then reached for her mother's silver hairbrush on the dressing table. Its weight in her hand was reassuring, a connection to a woman who had taught her that dignity requires neither wealth nor husband, only the courage to face each day on one's own terms. Someone had just challenged those terms. As Celia began her morning routine, the anonymous note lay in her kitchen stove. Reduced to ashes, the council dinner was held in the town hall, transformed for the evening with borrowed tablecloths and Mrs. Abernathy's prize chrysanthemums arranged in mason jars. Celia arrived precisely on time, neither early enough to appear eager nor late enough to make an entrance. Still, heads turned when she stepped through the doorway. The burgundy dress caught the lamplight, its careful tailoring evidence of the skill she typically devoted to others' clothing. She had arranged her hair more elaborately than usual, with her mother's tortoiseshell comb securing the coiled braids at the back of her head. "My goodness, Celia," Mrs. Peterson said, eyebrows raised. "Special occasion?" "Just a community dinner," Celia replied with practiced calm, though her heart beat rapidly. This small act of self-assertion felt strangely significant after years of careful invisibility. The room held an unusual mix: town council members and their wives, Sheriff Miller, Dr. Mitchell and Sarah, the bank manager, and several prominent ranchers. The Apache delegation had not yet arrived. Celia noted the strategic empty chairs distributed among the settlers rather than grouped together, a seating arrangement designed to separate the visitors. "Celia, you look lovely," Sarah whispered, appearing at her side, "though I'd avoid Eliza Hargrove if possible. She's quite put out that her new fiancé commented on your dress, Mare." Hargrove called for attention as the door opened to admit Swift Arrow and 3 other Apache representatives, 2 men and Morning Water. Celia observed how they took in the room with careful glances, missing nothing. Swift Arrow wore a formal black coat over a white shirt, attire that wouldn't have looked out of place in an eastern city. Only his long hair and moccasins marked him as different from the other men. Morning Water had adorned her dark hair with 2 silver combs that caught the light when she moved. The dinner proceeded with stilted conversation, punctuated by long silences. Mayor Hargrove dominated what discussion did occur, repeatedly emphasizing the benefits of progress and civilization in thinly veiled suggestions that the Apache should welcome the coming railroad and further settlement of their traditional, and that Swift Arrow responded with diplomatic vagueness that clearly frustrated the mayor. His perfect command of English and occasional literary references gradually drew genuine engagement from some of the others, particularly Dr. Mitchell, who discovered they shared an interest in botanical medicine. Celia remained quietly observant until the mayor's wife, in a rare moment of animation, asked Morning Water about the silver combs in her hair. "They are beautiful workmanship," Mrs. Hargrove said. Morning Water touched one comb and looked to Swift Arrow, who translated her response. "She says they were made by our grandmother from silver found in our mountains. The design represents flowing water returning to its source. Your people work silver?" Eliza Hargrove asked with obvious skepticism. "For many generations," Swift Arrow answered. "Before the Spanish brought their crosses and swords, my ancestors created ornaments that told our stories. Miss Caldwell," he continued, unexpectedly addressing Celia, "I noticed a book on your shop table yesterday, Thoreau's Walden. Are you familiar with his writings?" The table fell silent. Celia felt every eye upon her, surprise evident on most faces that she would possess such a book, let alone that Swift Arrow would have noticed it. "Yes," she answered, finding her voice. "My father was fond of Thoreau's ideas about self-reliance and simple living. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately." Swift Arrow quoted, his deep voice giving the words new resonance, "to front only the essential facts of life." Celia continued the passage, "and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." A small leather-bound volume appeared in Swift Arrow's hand, as if conjured from air. The book was well worn, its spine cracked from frequent reading. He placed it on the table between them. "Perhaps you would enjoy this as well. Emerson's Essays. A different perspective, but complementary to Thoreau's thinking." The simple act, offering a book across a dinner table, felt momentous in the charged atmosphere. Celia was acutely aware of Mayor Hargrove's darkening expression, of Sarah's barely concealed smile, of Eliza Hargrove's open shock. "Thank you," Celia said, accepting the volume. "I'll return it before you leave. Keep it as long as you wish," Swift Arrow replied. "Words should travel freely between minds that value them." The conversation shifted as Sheriff Miller loudly asked about hunting territories, but the moment lingered. Celia opened the book briefly to find annotations in a precise hand filling the margins, evidence of a thoughtful reader engaging deeply with the text. When she looked up, she found Morning Water watching her with knowing eyes. The woman's expression held no judgment, only a quiet assessment that seemed to see beyond Celia's carefully maintained facade to something beneath, something perhaps even Celia herself had forgotten was there. Dawn broke over the Apache encampment 3 miles outside of Broken Springs. Swift Arrow stood at the edge of the circle of lodges, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains gold. Behind him, the camp was already stirring, women rekindling cooking fires, children helping with morning chores, men checking horses and preparing for the day's activities. He wore only buckskin leggings and a cotton shirt, having shed the confining formal coat from the previous night's uncomfortable dinner. At his neck hung a small medicine pouch, a worn leather bag containing sacred objects accumulated through his 40 years. He touched it briefly, a habitual gesture when his thoughts were troubled. "You are awake early." "Brother," Morning Water said in Apache as she approached with a cup of coffee, one of the white man's customs their people had adopted. "Did the White Eye's words keep you from sleep?" Swift Arrow accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Not their words, their silences. They say much without speaking." Morning Water settled beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. The seamstress woman, she has different silences. She watches and listens as our grandmother taught us. Swift Arrow did not respond immediately. His thoughts had indeed lingered on Celia Caldwell, her quiet dignity, her unexpected knowledge of literature, the way she moved through her own community like a shadow, present but rarely acknowledged. She is not like the others, he finally conceded. Morning Water made a soft sound of agreement. The others treat her as we are treated, seen but not truly seen. In the distance a rider appeared, approaching from the direction of Broken Springs. Swift Arrow recognized Thomas Red Feather, one of the young men he had sent to observe the town overnight. Red Feather dismounted and approached, his expression serious. "The council has sent telegrams east and south," he reported, without preamble. A rider left at first light for Fort Apache. Swift Arrow had expected this. The dinner conversation had made it clear that Mayor Hargrove had no intention of negotiating in good faith. The man wanted only the appearance of diplomacy while seeking military intervention. What else? He asked, knowing Red Feather would not have returned for this news alone. The old woman, the one who arranges papers in the public place, she posted a notice about a gathering tonight. A celebration for the banker's son and his promised wife. Morning Water raised an eyebrow. A wedding? An announcement only, Red Feather clarified. But they say the entire town will attend. Swift Arrow considered this information. Such an event would provide an opportunity to observe the community's dynamics more fully, to identify potential allies and confirmed adversaries. There is more, Red Feather added, his voice dropping. The seamstress's home was marked while she was at the dinner. Swift Arrow stiffened. Marked how? Red paint on her door. Not words, just a smear, Red Feather demonstrated with a gesture. 2 men did it. They wore no badges but spoke of teaching lessons. The implicit threat stirred a cold anger in Swift Arrow's chest. Such tactics were familiar. Intimidate those who showed any openness to the Apache, isolate potential allies, maintain the fear and hatred that justified taking their lands. He turned to his lodge, ducking inside to retrieve something from his travel pack. The brass compass had been a gift from his Harvard professor, a man who had treated him as a scholar rather than a curiosity. The instrument's weight in his palm was reassuring, a reminder of worlds navigated and boundaries crossed. Unlike many of his people, Swift Arrow had walked in both worlds. He had learned the white man's knowledge in their eastern schools, had advised territorial governors, and even once met President Grant. He had also sat in council with tribal elders, had fasted for visions in sacred places, had led his warriors in defense of their hunting grounds. The compass represented his unique position, never fully accepted by either world, yet able to navigate both. What will you do? Morning Water asked when he emerged. Swift Arrow slipped the compass into his pocket. The negotiation with the council continues this afternoon. But first, I will visit the trading post. He nodded toward Broken Springs. I find myself in need of certain supplies. Morning Water studied him, understanding dawning in her eyes. The woman with the needle and thread. Her name is Celia, he said quietly, and she has been marked for showing simple human decency. Our grandfather taught us what is required when the innocent are threatened. The council will not approve, she warned. Swift Arrow mounted his horse with fluid grace. The council seeks peace through submission. I seek peace through strength and understanding. There is a difference. As he rode toward town, the rising sun at his back, Swift Arrow considered the complexity of his position. He had come to negotiate for his people's rights to their ancestral lands, not to become involved in a town's petty prejudices or the life of a solitary seamstress. Yet something about Celia Caldwell had resonated with him. Perhaps her evident isolation in the midst of her community, a feeling he understood all too well, despite being surrounded by his people. The woman stood between worlds, as he did, and now she had been marked for it. Celia discovered the red mark on her door early that morning. It looked like blood at first glance, a crude, diagonal slash across the weathered wood. Closer inspection revealed it to be paint, still tacky to the touch. The message required no words to be understood. She scrubbed it away immediately, hands trembling slightly, but jaw set with determination. By the time she opened her shop, no visible evidence remained, though she felt permanently marked nonetheless. The town had escalated from whispers to warnings. The morning passed in unusual quiet. Few customers entered, though Celia noticed more people than usual passing by her windows, slowing to peer inside before moving on. She kept Emerson's essays on her work table, occasionally running her fingers over the worn leather binding when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her composure. Shortly before noon, the bell above her door jangled. Celia looked up to find Eliza Hargrove standing in her shop, elegant in a pale blue walking dress that Celia herself had finished the previous month. "Miss Caldwell," Eliza said, her voice carrying the particular tone of forced pleasantness that Celia had come to recognize as prelude to unpleasantness. "I've come about my wedding ensemble." "Of course," Celia replied, setting aside her mending. "Though I wasn't expecting you until next week's final fitting." Eliza wandered the small shop, trailing gloved fingers across fabric bolts. "Plans change. Father thinks it best we move the wedding forward. With all this unpleasantness in town." She gestured vaguely, but her meaning was clear. The Apache presence had disrupted the town's comfort. "I see. When would you like to schedule?" "I'll also need to make changes to the design," Eliza interrupted. "Something more elaborate. After all, I'm marrying the banker's son." Her gaze settled meaningfully on Emerson's essays. "We want everything to be properly impressive, to show the right standards." Celia recognized the implicit comparison. Eliza, at 22, embodied everything Broken Springs valued in a woman: youth, beauty, a prestigious match. Celia represented everything they feared: independence, advancing age, solitude. "I'd be happy to discuss modifications," Celia said evenly. "Though significant changes this close to the wedding would require additional charges and time." Eliza waved a dismissive hand. "Money isn't a concern." She paused, examining a scrap of the beaded fabric Morning Water had traded. "I understand you've developed quite an unusual acquaintance. Everyone's talking about your special attention from that Indian. I sold fabric to his sister, and he offered me a book," Celia replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Hardly cause for gossip." "Oh, but people will talk." Eliza's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Especially about a woman in your situation. Father says it's unnatural for their kind to show interest in white women, especially older ones." The deliberate cruelty hung in the air between them. Before Celia could respond, the door opened again. Swift Arrow stood in the entrance, sunlight at his back casting his tall figure in sharp relief. Eliza stiffened, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to calculation. "Why, Mr. Arrow," she said, voice honeyed. "What a coincidence." He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, but focused on Celia. "Miss Caldwell, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Celia managed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Miss Hargrove was just discussing wedding preparations." "How fortunate," Swift Arrow said, his deep voice revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Marriage ceremonies are sacred among my people as well. We believe they must be founded on mutual respect and honor to flourish." Eliza's smile tightened. "How primitive. You must excuse me. I have many appointments today." She moved toward the door, pausing beside Swift Arrow. "Do join us for the engagement celebration tonight. Father has invited the entire town to show there are no hard feelings about the negotiations." After she departed, silence filled the shop. Celia busied herself rearranging spools of thread, acutely conscious of Swift Arrow's presence. "Your door has been cleaned," he observed quietly. Celia's hands stilled. "You knew?" "My people watch the town. For our protection." He stepped further inside, placing a small bundle wrapped in deerskin on her counter. "This is for you." Celia hesitated, then carefully unwrapped the offering. Inside lay a knife with a bone handle, its blade gleaming with a subtle iridescence she'd never seen before. "Damascus steel," Swift Arrow explained. "Traded from Mexican merchants. The handle is carved from elk antler. It's beautiful, Celia said truthfully. But I don't understand. For protection, he said simply. And to cut thread, if you prefer. The hint of a smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious. The red mark was a warning. There may be others. Celia looked from the knife to his face. Why would you give me this? Your people have more reason than anyone to distrust mine. Swift Arrow was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps because you looked at my sister as a person, not a curiosity. Perhaps because you recognize Thoreau's wisdom. He gestured toward the Emerson volume. Or perhaps because I, too, know what it is to stand apart from one's own people while still being of them. The engagement celebration transformed the town hall with paper lanterns and ribbons, creating a festive atmosphere at odds with the undercurrent of tension running through Broken Springs. Celia arrived late, having debated until the last minute whether to attend at all. She wore her burgundy dress again, an act of quiet defiance, with the Damascus knife concealed in a specially sewn pocket beneath her skirts. She slipped in quietly, hoping to avoid notice, but Sarah spotted her immediately and hurried over. "You came! I was beginning to think you'd decided against it." Sarah lowered her voice. "Fair warning, there's been drinking and not just the punch." Several of the men brought flasks. Celia surveyed the room. Mayor Hargrove held court near his daughter and her fiancé, Edward Winters, a pale, serious young man who seemed perpetually uncomfortable in his own skin. The Apache delegation was present but separate, standing near the refreshment table where Swift Arrow conversed with Dr. Mitchell. "Any more incidents?" Sarah asked, nodding towards Celia's freshly scrubbed door. "Not today." Celia hadn't told anyone about Swift Arrow's gift. Some instinct warned her to keep that connection private. The festivities proceeded with toasts to the engaged couple, music from a trio of local musicians, and dancing. Celia remained at the periphery watching. She noticed how Eliza kept glancing towards Swift Arrow, while Edward's attention rarely left the contents of his cup. "That girl is playing with fire," Sarah murmured, following Celia's gaze. "Jacob says she's been asking entirely too many questions about Indian customs since the delegation arrived." "Curiosity isn't a crime," Celia replied. "It is when your father is plotting to have those same Indians forcibly removed from their land," Sarah countered. "Jacob overheard the mayor with Sheriff Miller. They've wired the governor requesting cavalry support." The music paused as Mayor Hargrove called for attention. "Friends, neighbors, tonight we celebrate not just my daughter's engagement, but the prosperity and future of Broken Springs itself." Cheers greeted his words. "Soon, the railroad will bring progress to our little town. New opportunities, new buildings." His gaze flicked briefly toward the Apache delegation. "And proper civilization to this wild territory." Swift Arrow's expression revealed nothing. But Celia noticed the tightening of his jaw, the subtle straightening of his spine. Whatever negotiations had transpired that day had clearly not gone well. As the mayor continued extolling the virtues of progress and his future son-in-law, a commotion at the entrance drew attention. A young Apache woman, not Morning Water but someone younger, burst into the hall, her face streaked with dust and fear. She made directly for Swift Arrow, speaking rapidly in their language. The room fell silent, all pretense of celebration forgotten, as Swift Arrow's expression darkened. He responded with a few quick questions, then turned to Dr. Mitchell. "My nephew has been thrown from his horse and is badly injured," he said, his voice controlled but urgent. "He was bringing supplies to our camp when the accident occurred." "I'll get my bag," Dr. Mitchell said immediately, but Mayor Hargrove stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute. This celebration is for my daughter. Surely your people have medicine men or whatever you call them to tend to your own." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Swift Arrow's gaze fixed on the mayor with dangerous intensity. "He is a boy of 12. The injury is beyond our immediate treatment." Dr. Mitchell moved toward the door. "I'll go." "Where is the child?" The young woman spoke again, and Swift Arrow translated. "They've brought him to the edge of town. They were afraid to come closer after dark." "I'll come too," Sarah said, already moving to join her husband. I've assisted before. Celia found herself stepping forward without conscious decision. My home is closest to the edge of town. Bring him there. Surprise flickered across multiple faces, swift arrows, Sarah's, the mayor's, though for very different reasons. Celia herself felt a moment of astonishment at her own boldness. That won't be necessary, Mayor Hargrove began, but Dr. Mitchell cut him off. Actually, it's an excellent idea. Better than moving the boy twice if he has spinal injuries. Everything happened quickly after that. The celebration dissolved into buzzing conversation as Dr. and Mrs. Mitchell departed with Swift Arrow and the young woman. Celia slipped away in the confusion, hurrying home to prepare. She lit extra lamps and pulled back the colourful quilt on her spare bed, a wedding ring, pattern she'd begun years ago for her own marriage and finished during lonely winter evenings after Thomas Shelby's betrayal. The quilt circles interlocked in an eternal pattern of connection and continuity, the careful stitching evidence of hundreds of solitary hours. Now it would serve a purpose she could never have imagined, covering an injured Apache child in the home of a woman the town had deemed irrelevant. The irony wasn't lost on Celia as she gathered clean linens and set water to boil on the stove. When hoofbeats approached, she opened her door wide, allowing light to spill onto the dusty path. A beacon in the darkness, dawn found Celia's small home transformed into an impromptu field hospital. The injured boy, White Cloud, Swift Arrow's sister's son, lay on the spare bed, his breathing finally steady after Dr. Mitchell had set his broken leg and treated the gash on his forehead. Morning Water sat beside him, singing softly in Apache, while Sarah Mitchell dozed in Celia's rocking chair. In the kitchen, Celia prepared coffee as Swift Arrow and Dr. Mitchell spoke in low voices. The break was clean, the doctor was saying. He's young and strong, should heal well if infection doesn't set in. The head wound concerns me more. He needs to remain still for at least 2 days. Here, Swift Arrow asked, glancing towards Celia. She answered before the doctor could. Yes, moving him would be dangerous. She handed Swift Arrow a steaming cup. There's plenty of room. Dr. Mitchell rubbed his tired eyes. I'll return this afternoon to check on him. He looked meaningfully at Swift Arrow, and to speak with you about what the boy told us. After the doctor departed, Celia and Swift Arrow sat at her small kitchen table in the grey morning light. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable, despite the circumstances. Your people are looking for you, Celia finally said. The young woman, Skyflower, said others would come at first light. Swift Arrow nodded. The council meeting continues today. They will expect me to attend despite this complication. What did White Cloud tell Dr. Mitchell? She asked, remembering the doctor's pointed comment. Swift Arrow's expression darkened. He was not thrown from his horse. He was returning from hunting when 2 men on horseback pursued him. One carried a rope. His hands tightened around the coffee cup. They claimed he was stealing cattle. When he tried to explain, they knocked him from his pony. Celia felt sick. Who would do such a thing to a child? Men who see no child, only an Apache. His voice was even, but contained a controlled fury. The same men who marked your door, perhaps. Movement at the window caught Celia's attention. She rose quickly and peered through the curtains to see 3 men on horseback stopping at her garden gate. Sheriff Miller, Mayor Hargrove, and Edward Winters. An unusual combination, especially at this early hour. We have visitors, she said quietly. Swift Arrow joined her at the window. His face revealed nothing, but she felt the tension in his body. You should not face them alone, he said. Nor should you, she countered. Not with a young boy's safety at stake. Their eyes met in silent communication. Then Celia moved to her grandfather's old trunk in the corner, a weathered wooden chest she'd brought from back east when her parents decided to seek their fortune in the west. From it, she withdrew a folded document yellowed with age. This land is mine, she said, holding the deed. Paid for with my father's life insurance after the fever took him. This house stands on my property. She smoothed the document on the table. The official territorial seal still visible in the corner, her name written in formal script as the legal owner. No one enters without my permission. she continued with quiet determination. Not the sheriff, not the mayor. Swift Arrow studied her for a long moment. You risk much. What do I risk? Celia asked, a hint of bitterness in her voice. The good opinion of a town that has judged me lacking for 15 years. The friendship of people who look through me rather than at me. She shook her head. I have less to lose than most. A knock at the door interrupted them. Celia straightened her shoulders and moved to answer it, land deeds still in hand. Sheriff Miller removed his hat when she opened the door. Behind him, Mayor Hargrove and Edward Winters remained mounted, watching with undisguised suspicion. Miss Caldwell, the sheriff said, we've come about the situation. If you mean the injured child inside, Dr. Mitchell is attending to him and has ordered that he not be moved. Mayor Hargrove leaned forward in his saddle. Miss Caldwell, harboring savages is a dangerous business, especially with the territorial governor sending troops to help resolve our Apache problem. Troops? Celia repeated, her grip tightening on the deed. Due within the week, the mayor confirmed with obvious satisfaction. Meanwhile, we can't have their kind coming and going through town. Bad for morale, bad for safety. This is my property, Celia said, holding up the deed. And I decide who is welcome here. Edward Winters spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a hint of his future father-in-law's authority. The Bankers Association is reviewing all outstanding loans and property agreements in preparation for the railroad. Would be a shame if there were irregularities found in yours. The threat was barely veiled. Celia felt a cold weight in her stomach, but kept her expression neutral. Is that all, gentlemen? I have a patient to attend to. As they departed with promises to check in later, Celia closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly aware of Swift Arrow standing in the hallway. His face showed a new expression, something like admiration mixed with concern. The deed is important to you, he observed. It's the only thing that's truly mine, she answered. My independence, my safety. She looked toward the room where the boy lay sleeping. And now his. By afternoon, Celia's home had become an island between two worlds. Morning Water and another Apache woman tended to White Cloud, while outside, two Apache warriors stood sentinel beyond the garden gate, watching the road to town. Swift Arrow had reluctantly departed for the council meeting, promising to return by nightfall. Sarah Mitchell arrived with a basket of supplies and news from town. They're saying you've chosen sides, she said, as she unpacked bandages and medicines on Celia's table. Mrs. Abernathy is beside herself, claims you've betrayed your own kind. Celia continued preparing broth for the injured boy. And what do you think, Sarah? I think you're showing more Christian charity than the entire church congregation put together. Sarah's normally cheerful face was serious. But Jacob says the situation is worsening. Mayor Hargrove has telegraphed exaggerated reports of Apache hostilities. The cavalry won't just come to supervise, they'll come expecting trouble. A soft moan from the bedroom drew their attention. White Cloud had awakened, his young face tight with pain. Morning Water spoke to him gently, then looked up as Celia entered with the broth. He asks for Swift Arrow, she translated. He'll return soon, Celia assured her, setting down the tray. How is the fever? Morning Water placed a hand on the boy's forehead. Better. Your medicines help. She hesitated, then added, My brother says you are not like other white women. Perhaps I am more like them than you think, Celia replied. Just less willing to pretend. The afternoon passed in quiet activity. Dr. Mitchell visited briefly, pleased with White Cloud's improvement, but concerned about moving him before his condition stabilized further. The Apache sentinels remained outside, silent guardians whose presence both reassured and unnerved Celia. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. As twilight approached, Celia found herself watching the road from her kitchen window. Swift Arrow had said he would return, and she believed him, though she questioned her own eagerness for his arrival. A movement caught her eye, not from the direction of town, but from the scrubland behind her house. A figure on horseback approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the junipers. Celia tensed, her hand instinctively seeking the Damascus knife she now kept in her apron pocket. But it was Swift Arrow who emerged into the clearing behind her home, dismounting with fluid grace. He spoke briefly with the sentinels before approaching her back door. "You came around the long way," she observed as she let him in. The council meeting ended poorly. His expression was grim. "It's no longer safe to be seen on the main road." In the kitchen, he removed something from inside his coat, a folded piece of parchment covered with flowing script. "This arrived for me during the meeting, from the territorial governor." Celia glanced at the document as he spread it on the table. The official letterhead bore an elaborate seal, the signature at the bottom, sprawling importantly across the page. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but the meaning clear enough. "They've ordered your people to relocate," she said quietly. Again, Swift Arrow's face hardened. "To a reservation 200 miles south, land that cannot support our horses or our way of life." His finger traced a particular paragraph. "They claim it is for our protection and the advancement of civilization." "When?" "The cavalry arrives in 5 days to escort us." The bitterness in his voice was barely contained. Celia sank into a chair, the weight of the situation settling over her. "And if you refuse, then we are declared hostile. They will use force." He folded the document with careful precision. "My people have been pushed from place to place for generations, each time with promises of permanence, each time broken when something valuable is discovered. Gold. Copper this time. And the railroad will make it profitable to mine." He looked at her directly. "Your Mayor Hargrove has invested heavily in the mining company. The banker as well." The pieces fell into place for Celia, the rushed negotiations, Edward Winter's thinly veiled threat about her property, the exaggerated reports of Apache hostility. "All to clear the way for profit. What will you do?" she asked. Before Swift Arrow could answer, Morning Water appeared in the doorway, her expression urgent. "The boy asks for you both." In the small bedroom, White Cloud lay propped against pillows, his young face serious beyond his years. Beside him on the quilt lay a small object that caught the lamplight, a carved wooden wolf, its form simple but powerful, worn smooth by handling. The boy spoke in Apache, his eyes moving between Celia and Swift Arrow. Morning Water translated. He says the men who hurt him spoke of clearing out the vermin before the important people arrive. They said the Apache must be gone before the railroad men come to survey. Her voice faltered slightly. He says they mentioned burning out those who stood in the way. White Cloud picked up the wooden wolf and held it out to Swift Arrow. Speaking again with surprising strength, he says to give you his guardian spirit, Morning Water translated, for protection in the days to come. It was carved by our grandfather. Swift Arrow accepted the carving, his expression solemn. "Tell him I will carry it with honor." The boy then looked directly at Celia and spoke a few words. He says, "You have a warrior's heart in a woman's body," Morning Water translated, like his mother who died fighting the soldiers 2 winters ago. In the silence that followed, Celia felt something shift within her, a quiet resolution forming from the chaos of recent days. Whatever came next, she had already crossed a boundary from which there was no simple return. The next morning brought a shift in the wind, carrying the scent of rain from the distant mountains. Celia woke early to find Swift Arrow had spent the night in her kitchen, sleeping upright in a chair, positioned to watch both doors. The carved wolf sat on the table before him, silent guardian of his vigil. "You should have taken my spare room," she said. Moving to stoke the stove. "I needed to watch," he replied simply, stretching his tall frame. 3 men rode past after midnight. They circled but did not approach. A chill ran through Celia that had nothing to do with the morning air. The same ones who hurt White Cloud? Perhaps. Swift Arrow rose, moving to the window with the unconscious grace that still caught Celia by surprise. "Your town is dividing itself. Some agree with the mayor. Others question." Dr. Mitchell arrived as Celia was serving breakfast, his medical bag in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. His expression was grim as he handed the paper to Celia. The Broken Springs Gazette was little more than a weekly bulletin of local events and advertisements. But today's edition bore a bold headline: Apache sympathizer harbors dangerous elements. Beneath it, a smaller subtitle read, Spinster Caldwell's questionable allegiances raise concerns. Celia scanned the article, her face heating with each accusatory paragraph. The piece carefully avoided outright lies while insinuating a host of improprieties, everything from Apache worship, practices conducted in her home, to suggestions of unnatural arrangements between her and the self-styled Apache diplomat. It's outrageous, Dr. Mitchell said. Sarah was furious. She's already visited the editor to give him a piece of her mind. Swift Arrow read over Celia's shoulder, his face impassive, but his eyes darkening with each line. This is a common tactic, he observed quietly. Destroy a reputation first, then physical property seems justified. There's more, Dr. Mitchell added, lowering his voice. Sheriff Miller is organizing a town meeting tonight, calling it a community safety discussion. But Jacob at the telegraph office says it's about forming a committee to address the Apache problem before the cavalry arrives. A vigilance committee. Swift Arrow said the words flat, while Dr. Mitchell examined White Cloud, declaring him improved but still in need of rest. Celia moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, her mind churning with the newspaper's accusations. The words themselves were painful enough, but the knowledge that her neighbors, people she'd sewn for, traded with, lived alongside for years, would read and believe them cut deeper after the doctor left. Promising to return with Sarah that evening, Celia retreated to her bedroom. From beneath her mattress, she withdrew a slender volume bound in faded green leather, her mother's Bible. She hadn't opened it in years, her faith having withered under the weight of life's disappointments. But now she found herself seeking comfort in the familiar object. A pressed flower, a desert mariposa lily, marked the book of Ruth, her mother's favorite story of a woman who chose her own path despite society's expectations. The delicate petals had maintained their shape through years of safekeeping, preserved between the thin pages like a memory refusing to fade. Celia ran her finger gently over the flower, remembering her mother's quiet strength in the face of frontier hardships. What would she advise now, with the town turning against her daughter? With danger approaching from all sides? The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. She returned the Bible to its hiding place and moved quickly to the front room, where Swift Arrow already stood watching through the window. Sheriff Miller dismounted at her gate, alone this time. His expression was troubled as he approached the door, removing his hat when Celia opened it. Miss Caldwell, he began, his eyes flicking past her to where Swift Arrow stood. I've come with official notice. He withdrew a folded document from his vest pocket. Mayor Hargrove has called an emergency town council meeting. Your presence is requested. Celia accepted the paper without opening it. Am I being summoned or accused, Sheriff? Miller shifted uncomfortably. The council has questions about your current guests and about certain allegations, the ones printed in today's paper, she asked sharply, among others. His gaze moved to Swift Arrow. There are rumors that your people are planning resistance to the relocation order, that weapons are being stockpiled. Swift Arrow's face revealed nothing. And you believe I would discuss such matters where your sheriff could easily hear them? Miller flushed. The meeting is at 7 tonight, Miss Caldwell. I'd advise you to attend. Without company. He nodded toward Swift Arrow. Some folks are looking for excuses. Best not to provide them. After he departed, Celia unfolded the notice. Beneath the formal language of the summons lay an implicit threat. Her standing in the community, her business, perhaps even her property hung in the balance. You should go, Swift Arrow said quietly. Defend yourself. And say what? Celia's voice held uncharacteristic bitterness. That I've done nothing wrong except show basic humanity. They've already decided. Perhaps. He moved closer, his presence somehow steadying despite the circumstances. Or perhaps some simply follow the loudest voice. They may need to hear another. Celia looked down at the summons, then at the newspaper with its damning headlines. Her life in Broken Springs, solitary but secure, ignored but peaceful, was unraveling with each passing hour. Yet beneath her fear stirred something unexpected, a certainty that she stood on the right side of a line she hadn't known existed until Swift Arrow crossed it into her world. Swift Arrow departed Celia's home before midday, needing to confer with his people about the looming threat of both vigilantes and cavalry. Morning Water remained with White Cloud, whose condition continued to improve, though he still couldn't be safely moved. "I will return before your meeting," Swift Arrow promised as he prepared to leave. "My sentinels will remain nearby, though hidden. You are not unprotected." Alone with her thoughts, Celia found herself drawn to the small silver hand mirror that had been her grandmother's. The ornate piece had traveled west in her mother's trunk, one of the few luxuries they'd brought from Philadelphia. Celia rarely used it. Her plain wooden looking-glass served well, enough for daily needs, but today she found herself studying her reflection with new awareness. The face that gazed back was neither young nor old, lined at the eyes and mouth from years of sun and focused needlework. Her hair, pinned severely back in her usual style, showed threads of silver among the brown. Not beautiful by any conventional measure, but a face that had weathered disappointment without surrendering to bitterness. "What do you see in me?" she wondered aloud, thinking of Swift Arrow's steady gaze that seemed to look beyond surface appearances. The question unsettled her, suggesting possibilities she had long ago disciplined herself not to consider. Setting the mirror aside, Celia turned her attention to practical matters. If she was to face the town council, she would need to prepare carefully, both her arguments and her appearance. She selected her most formal outfit, a navy blue dress with modest lace trim that she'd made for funerals and christenings. Somber, respectable, defiant in its propriety, Sarah arrived mid-afternoon, bringing news and moral support. "Half the town is talking about tonight's meeting," she reported as she helped Celia press her dress. "Jacob says Mayor Hargrove has been in close conference with Edward Winters and his father all day. They're planning something beyond just questioning you." Celia threaded a needle, focusing on mending a small tear in her gloves. "What about Dr. Mitchell? Will he attend?" "Of course. He's preparing a statement about White Cloud's injuries, medical evidence that he was attacked, not thrown from his horse." Sarah hesitated. "Celia, there's something else you should know. Thomas Shelby is back in town." The needle pricked Celia's finger, a bright drop of blood welling up. "Thomas? Why would he return now?" "Apparently he's representing the railroad investors. Arrived on yesterday's stage." Sarah watched her friend carefully. "Will that complicate matters for you?" 15 years had passed since Thomas Shelby had promised to marry Celia, then abandoned her for a younger, wealthier woman. 15 years since Broken Springs had witnessed her humiliation and assigned her the role of cautionary tale. The thought of facing him again, especially now, sent a cold wave through her stomach. "No," she said finally, pressing her handkerchief against the pinprick. "Thomas Shelby has no power over me. Not anymore." As dusk approached, Swift Arrow returned as promised. He had changed into formal attire, similar to what he'd worn at the council dinner. Black coat, white shirt, string tie. But now a revolver hung openly at his hip. "The situation deteriorates," he said simply when Celia noted the weapon. "My people are preparing to defend themselves if necessary. The women and children will move to the high canyon tonight." "And White Cloud?" "Morning Water will stay with him here if you permit it. 2 warriors will remain hidden nearby." Celia nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Will you come to the meeting?" "That would only inflame tensions," he replied. "This is a test of where their loyalty lies, with justice or with fear. You must face them alone." As the hour approached, Celia made final preparations. She pinned her hair in a conservative style, donned the navy dress, and faced her reflection one last time in the silver mirror. The woman who looked back seemed different somehow, more resolute, less willing to accept the judgment of others. Before leaving, she paused in the doorway of the spare bedroom where White Cloud rested, Morning Water sitting vigilant beside him. The boy's dark eyes watched her with solemn awareness beyond his years. "I will return," Celia assured them, surprised at her own certainty. Outside, twilight had fallen. Main Street glowed with lamplight as townsfolk moved toward the meeting hall. Celia walked alone, back straight, steps measured. She felt rather than saw Swift Arrow's warriors moving parallel to her route, shadows among shadows. The crowd parted slightly as she approached the hall steps. Whispers followed in her wake, but she kept her gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares. Inside, the room was already crowded, with the town council seated at a table on the raised platform. Mayor Hargrove sat centre, flanked by Edward Winters and his father, the banker, and there, to the mayor's right, sat Thomas Shelby, older, heavier, but unmistakable, with his confident smile and appraising eyes that had once made Celia's young heart race. Now they met hers, with only mild curiosity, as if she were a stranger. Celia took her assigned seat in the front row, folding her gloved hands in her lap. As the room settled, she became aware of Sarah and Dr. Mitchell entering, taking places directly behind her. Small gestures of alliance that in Broken Springs constituted acts of courage. Mayor Hargrove called the meeting to order, his gavel striking with ominous finality. "We are gathered to address grave concerns regarding the safety and moral standing of our community," he began, his eyes finding Celia's with undisguised condemnation. The trial, for that was what it truly was, had begun. "Miss Caldwell," Mayor Hargrove's voice carried across the packed meeting hall, "you stand before this council to answer for actions that have placed our community at risk. How do you respond to the charge that you have knowingly harbored hostile Apache in your home against the express concerns of this town's leadership?" Celia rose, acutely conscious of the eyes upon her. "I have given shelter to an injured child and those caring for him on the recommendation of Dr. Mitchell. There is no law against offering medical care to those in need." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thomas Shelby leaned forward, studying her with newfound interest. "And what of your continued association with the Apache called Swift Arrow?" The mayor pressed. "Witnesses report multiple private meetings, exchange of items, and conversations in which you appeared overly familiar with this individual. Swift Arrow is an educated man representing his people in negotiations that you yourself arranged." "Mayor Hargrove," Celia replied steadily, "our interactions have been proper and primarily concerned with the welfare of his injured nephew." "Proper?" Eliza Hargrove's voice cut through from the second row. "Is that what you call it when an unmarried woman receives a man alone in her home? Or perhaps standards are different for those who have given up on conventional prospects?" The barb struck its target, but Celia kept her expression neutral. "Dr. and Mrs. Mitchell have been present during most visits, as has Swift Arrow's sister. There has been nothing improper in our conduct." The banker, Harrison Winters, cleared his throat importantly. "Miss Caldwell, are you aware that your property sits on land that will be vital to the coming railroad development? That your resistance to community consensus creates obstacles to progress that will benefit all of Broken Springs?" So there it was, the true reason behind this public inquisition. Not morality or safety, but money and power. "My deed is clear and legally filed," Celia answered. "How does offering shelter to an injured child obstruct progress?" "It is not the child, but what he represents," Mayor Hargrove interjected. "By choosing to align yourself with Apache interests, you place yourself in opposition to this town's future." Dr. Mitchell stood suddenly. "I must object to these proceedings. As the boy's physician, I directed that he not be moved. Miss Caldwell acted on medical advice, nothing more." "Your objection is noted, Doctor," the mayor replied dismissively. "However, this matter extends beyond medical concerns to questions of loyalty and community safety." Thomas Shelby rose then, adjusting his expensive waistcoat. From his pocket, he withdrew a gleaming gold pocket watch on a heavy chain, exactly the type of ostentatious accessory he had always favored. He made a show of checking the time before addressing the room. "Perhaps I might offer a perspective as someone both familiar with Miss Caldwell's character and representing the railroad's interests," he said smoothly. I've known Celia since she was a young woman of great propriety. I find it difficult to believe she would intentionally act against community interests. His apparent defense carried an undercurrent that made Celia's skin crawl. The subtle emphasis on her past, the patronizing tone. He was positioning himself as an authority on her character while reminding everyone of their previous connection. That said, Thomas continued, the railroad's development cannot be delayed. The Apache relocation order is final and necessary. Miss Caldwell's property will be required for the planned depot and supporting businesses. He smiled at her with practiced charm. Perhaps a private discussion of compensation would resolve this unfortunate situation to everyone's benefit. Celia felt a rush of clarity. Thomas hadn't changed. He still believed everything and everyone had a price. I have nothing to discuss privately with you, Mr. Shelby, she said, her voice carrying clearly. My home is not for sale, especially not under threat or coercion. Mayor Hargrove's face darkened. Miss Caldwell, you leave this council little choice. Either you demonstrate your loyalty to this community by ceasing all association with the Apache delegation, or we must consider measures to protect Broken Springs from your dangerous influence. What measures exactly? Celia asked. For a start, decent folk will be advised to take their business elsewhere, Harrison Winters stated flatly. Additionally, your loan with our bank will be reviewed for immediate repayment under the risk assessment clause. Financial ruin, social isolation, the twin threats that had kept the women of Broken Springs in line for generations. Before Celia could respond, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. Swift Arrow stood in the entrance, still in his formal attire, but now wearing a traditional beaded headband with a single eagle feather standing tall. The room fell silent as he walked with deliberate steps down the center aisle. I apologize for interrupting your proceedings, he said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly. But events have overtaken these discussions. He stopped beside Celia, not looking at her but addressing the council directly. A cavalry detachment has arrived at Fort Williams, 50 miles east. They will reach Broken Springs by tomorrow evening, with orders to remove my people to the southern reservation, by force if necessary. Mayor Hargrove smiled thinly. Then our Apache problem will soon be resolved. Perhaps, Swift Arrow replied. But first I have come to make an announcement of my own. He turned slightly, his gaze finally meeting Celia's. I have come to declare my intention to take Miss Celia Caldwell as my wife. Under both Apache law and territorial statute, the room erupted in shock. Celia felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. This is outrageous. The mayor sputtered. It is my right, Swift Arrow stated calmly. As a Harvard-educated citizen recognized by the territorial governor, I am legally entitled to marry whom I choose. Miss Caldwell's property would then fall under the protection of my people's treaty rights, making it exempt from your railroad plans. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Mayor Hargrove slammed his gavel repeatedly while shouts erupted from all corners of the hall. Eliza Hargrove's face had gone deathly pale, her fiancé Edward looking equally stunned beside her. Thomas Shelby stared at Swift Arrow with calculated assessment, as if recalibrating his approach to an unexpected business competitor. Through the tumult, Celia remained utterly still, her mind struggling to process Swift Arrow's declaration. Was it merely a strategic move to protect both his people's interests and her property, or was there something more behind his steady gaze? Order! I will have order! Mayor Hargrove finally bellowed loud enough to quiet the room. This is preposterous. No such union would be recognized by any court or church. I have documentation that says otherwise. Swift Arrow withdrew an official-looking paper from inside his coat. The territorial statute of 1876 specifically permits marriages between citizens and civilized Indians who have received education at recognized institutions. My Harvard degree satisfies that requirement. Dr. Mitchell moved forward to examine the document, nodding slowly. He's correct. This appears to be properly certified by the territorial office. Thomas Shelby recovered his composure first. Regardless of legal technicalities, surely Miss Caldwell herself would never consent to such an arrangement. All eyes turned to Celia. In that moment of crushing scrutiny, she felt a strange sense of clarity. For decades, the town had defined her worth by her marital status, then judged her lacking when she remained single. Now her marriage potential had suddenly become a threat to their plans. "The council is adjourned for private deliberation," Mayor Hargrove announced abruptly. "Miss Caldwell, you will remain. Everyone else, please clear the hall." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Celia found herself seated alone at a small table before the council. Swift Arrow had been directed to wait outside despite his protests. Only Thomas Shelby had been invited to stay, his railroad interests deemed relevant to the discussion. "Celia," Mayor Hargrove began with forced gentleness, "surely you understand this savage is merely using you for your property. He cares nothing for you as a woman." She met his gaze steadily. "As opposed to those who would threaten my livelihood and reputation for access to that same property." Harrison Winters cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell, be reasonable. We're prepared to offer fair compensation, which I have already declined," she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "My home is not for sale." Thomas approached, pulling a chair close to hers, too close, his knee nearly touching her skirt. "Celia," he said softly, his voice dropping to the intimate tone she remembered from their courtship, "you're being manipulated. This Apache sees a vulnerable woman and is exploiting your kind heart." From his vest pocket, Thomas removed a small velvet box, placing it between them on the table. With deliberate showmanship, he opened it to reveal a diamond ring, gleaming in the lamplight. "Perhaps what you need is protection of a more appropriate kind," he continued. "My wife passed last winter. I find myself in need of a companion who knows the ways of frontier towns. Someone with experience managing a household." The shock of this second proposal in one evening left Celia momentarily speechless. The diamond ring sparkled coldly, its facets reflecting the harsh lamplight in fractured patterns across the table's wooden surface. Mayor Hargrove smiled with satisfaction. "There's your solution, Miss Caldwell. A respectable match with a man of means who represents progress. The town would welcome such a union." Celia stared at the ring, understanding precisely what Thomas offered, not love or respect, but a business arrangement wrapped in the thinnest veneer of propriety. She would gain social acceptance at the cost of her independence. Her property would smoothly transfer to railroad interests through marriage, and Thomas would acquire both a housekeeper and moral redemption for his past abandonment. "You left me at the altar 15 years ago," she said quietly. Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I was young and foolish. Life has taught me to recognize true value." "Yes," Celia agreed, rising slowly from her chair. "Life has taught me the same lesson." With steady hands, she closed the velvet box without touching the ring inside. "I decline your proposal, Mr. Shelby, and I will provide my answer to Swift Arrow privately, as is my right." "You can't possibly be considering his offer," Mayor Hargrove sputtered. "I'm considering my own path forward," Celia replied, finding strength in the words. "Something I should have done long ago, instead of accepting the role this town assigned me." Outside, twilight had deepened to full dark. Swift Arrow waited on the steps, his tall figure silhouetted against the street lamps. Sarah and Dr. Mitchell stood nearby, their faces showing equal measures of concern and admiration. "Walk with me," Celia said to Swift Arrow. Not as a request, but as a decision. They moved in silence through the darkened streets, watched by curious eyes from windows and doorways. When they reached the edge of town, where the road curved toward Celia's cottage, Swift Arrow finally spoke. "I must apologize for my announcement. The timing allowed no opportunity for private discussion." Celia looked up at the stars, emerging in the vast desert sky. Was it only strategy? A way to protect the land? He was quiet for several steps. "It began as strategy," he finally admitted. But I would not have proposed marriage, even a strategy, to a woman I did not respect. Among my people, such unions must be founded on honor, even when they serve practical purposes. Thomas Shelby offered me a diamond ring and social rehabilitation, Celia said, the words bitter on her tongue. The town council seems to think I should be grateful. And what do you think? Swift Arrow asked, his voice gentle in the darkness. Celia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I think I need to understand exactly what you're proposing before I can answer. They reached Celia's cottage to find Morning Water watching anxiously from the doorway. Inside, White Cloud slept peacefully, his fever broken at last. The boy improves, Morning Water said, relief evident in her voice. His spirit is strong. After updating them on White Cloud's condition, she tactfully withdrew to the kitchen, leaving Celia and Swift Arrow alone in the small parlor. The gravity of their situation hung between them, demanding words neither was entirely prepared to offer. Swift Arrow moved to the window, scanning the darkness outside before speaking. The cavalry will reach Broken Springs by tomorrow evening. My scouts report they travel with wagons, not supply wagons, but transport for those who cannot walk long distances. They expect resistance, Celia concluded. They expect to break resistance, he corrected quietly. They come prepared for a forced march to the southern reservation. The practical reality of their situation clarified matters. Whatever personal feelings might exist between them, circumstances demanded immediate decisions. What would marriage to you mean? Celia asked directly. Beyond the legal protection of my property. Swift Arrow turned from the window to face her fully. From inside his coat, he withdrew a silver concho belt, a magnificent piece of Apache craftsmanship featuring intricately stamped silver discs connected by leather backing. The central medallion was larger than the others, bearing a sunburst design surrounded by mountain symbols. Among my people, a marriage proposal is accompanied by gifts that represent the union's meaning, he explained, placing the belt carefully on the table between them. This belonged to my grandfather, who gave it to my grandmother when they married. The sun represents strength. The mountains represent endurance. Celia touched the cool silver hesitantly. It's beautiful. Marriage for my people is not merely a legal arrangement, but a joining of families, of purposes. His deep voice remained steady, though she detected unfamiliar tension in his posture. A wife is not property but partner. Her voice is heard in council, her wisdom respected in decisions. And if the wife is not Apache, Celia asked, there would be challenges, he acknowledged. Some would not accept you readily. Others would judge me for choosing outside our ways. A faint smile touched his lips. Not unlike the reception we received in your town council tonight. Despite everything, Celia found herself returning his smile. We seem to create controversy wherever we go. Yes, the word carried unexpected warmth. That is perhaps the first thing I noticed about you, Miss Caldwell. You do not fear standing apart when necessary, Celia, she corrected softly. If we're discussing marriage, perhaps you should use my given name. Celia, he repeated, the syllables carrying different music in his voice. And I am Nayati to my family, though few outside my people use this name. The intimacy of this exchange, the sharing of a private name, affected Celia more deeply than she had expected. This was no longer merely strategic discussion, but something more personal. If I accepted, she said carefully, would it be a true marriage in all ways? Swift Arrow, Nayati, held her gaze steadily. I would not dishonor you with pretense. Among my people, marriage involves physical union, the possibility of children, a shared dwelling, shared responsibilities. He paused. But I would not demand what is not freely given. We could determine together what our marriage would become. Celia moved to her rocking chair, needing the familiar comfort as she confronted the most unexpected decision of her life. At 40, she had long ago accepted spinsterhood as her permanent condition. Now, in the space of hours, she had received 2 proposals, one calculating and cold, the other complex but honorable. The town will never accept such a union, she said, thinking aloud. Likely not, he agreed, though some might surprise you. Your friend Sarah, the doctor, and your people. Some will welcome you for the strategic advantage. Others will resist any outsider. He spoke with frank honesty. My grandmother would have approved of your spirit. My sister already respects you. Celia's mind worked through the practical implications. Where would we live? Your people face forced relocation. We will not go willingly to the southern reservation, Swift Arrow stated. We have allies among other tribes, places in the mountains where cavalry cannot easily follow. His expression grew serious. Marriage to me would mean leaving behind the life you have known. It would not be easy. My life here has not been easy either, Celia replied softly. Just familiar. The mantel clock ticked steadily in the silence that followed. Through the partially open door, Celia could see Morning Water tending to White Cloud, singing a low, soothing melody in their language. The scene conveyed a sense of family that had been absent from her solitary existence. The cavalry comes tomorrow, Swift Arrow reminded her gently. I must return to my people tonight to prepare them. Whatever you decide, I will respect your choice. Celia rose from the rocking chair, her decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. For 15 years, she had lived according to the town's judgment, accepting their definition of her worth. Whatever came next, whether hardship, danger, or possibility, would be her choice entirely. I need until morning, she said. Come back at dawn for my answer. As Swift Arrow prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. Whatever you decide, you have earned my deepest respect. Celia Caldwell. His hand briefly covered hers, the touch warm and steady. Before he disappeared into the night, dawn arrived with gentle persistence, painting the eastern sky in hues of amber and rose. Celia had slept little, the hours filled instead with reflection and preparation. By first light, she had packed a small trunk with essentials, practical clothing, her sewing tools, her mother's Bible, the wooden thimble from Morning Water, and a few cherished mementos of her parents. The rest, furniture, household goods, most of her fabrics, she would leave behind. Surprising herself, she felt little attachment to these things that had defined her life for so many years. In the small bedroom, White Cloud was awake and alert, his young face serious as Morning Water helped him sit up against the pillows. Despite his injury, there was a quiet dignity in his bearing that reminded Celia of his uncle. We must leave today, Morning Water said, her eyes conveying what her limited English could not fully express. The soldiers come, I know. Celia handed her a bundle of prepared medicines and bandages for White Cloud's continuing care. These will help with his healing. From beneath her apron, Celia withdrew a small object wrapped in soft muslin. She placed it in White Cloud's hands. For you, to replace what you gave to your uncle. The boy unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden horse, intricately carved from cedar wood. It had been a gift from Celia's father on her 12th birthday, a reminder of the gentle stallion she'd learned to ride back east before their journey west. White Cloud ran his fingers over the smooth contours, his expression softening. He spoke quietly in Apache to Morning Water, who translated with a smile. He says it carries strong medicine, the spirit of freedom. He will keep it close always. A soft knock at the door announced Sarah's arrival. Her eyes widened at the sight of Celia's trunk and the general state of preparation. Then you've decided, she said. Not a question, but a confirmation, yes. The single word contained volumes. Doubt, determination, hope. Sarah embraced her fiercely. Jacob and I brought the wagon. We'll take White Cloud and Morning Water to the meeting point Swift Arrow arranged. She pulled back, studying her friend's face. Are you certain, Celia? Once you do this, there's no turning back, Celia finished for her. I've lived 15 years with the town's judgment. I can live with this choice too. She squeezed Sarah's hands. Will you be all right? Helping us may cause trouble for you and the doctor. Let them try, Sarah replied with unexpected steel in her voice. Jacob has already accepted a position with the Territorial Medical Office in Santa Fe. We were planning to tell everyone next month. While Dr. Mitchell and Sarah carefully moved white cloud to their covered wagon, Celia took a final walk through the home that had been her sanctuary and prison. In the kitchen, she ran her fingers over the worn table where she'd taken solitary meals for years. In her bedroom, she straightened the quilt one last time. On the mantelpiece stood her grandmother's clock, a solid pendulum timepiece that had marked the hours of her life with reliable precision. Unlike the delicate silver mirror or her other keepsakes, it was too heavy to bring. Yet leaving it felt significant, as if she were consciously stepping outside the measured rhythm that had governed her existence. A horse's whinny announced Swift Arrow's arrival. He appeared in the doorway as Celia stood contemplating the clock, his expression unreadable. "You're taking very little," he observed. Noticing her single trunk, "I'm bringing what matters," she replied. "The rest is just things." He crossed the room to stand beside her, his presence somehow both foreign and familiar. "Have you decided?" Celia turned to face him directly. At 40, she had long ago stopped expecting life to offer second chances or new beginnings. Yet here stood a man who saw value in her strength rather than failure in her unmarried status, offering a future she could never have imagined. "I have conditions," she said firmly. "I will learn your language and customs, but I will keep my own faith. I will respect your people's ways, but I expect my skills and knowledge to be respected in return. And I will need time for us to truly know each other before our marriage becomes complete in all ways." A smile touched Swift Arrow's Nayati's eyes, warming his serious face. "These are honorable conditions. My people value clear speech and honest terms." He offered his hand, palm up. "Is this your answer then?" Celia placed her hand in his, the connection sending an unexpected warmth through her body. "Yes." Outside, Dr. Mitchell had finished securing White Cloud in the wagon. Morning Water sat beside the boy, her expression softening when she saw Celia and Swift Arrow emerge hand in hand. "The cavalry was spotted 10 miles east," Dr. Mitchell reported. "We should move quickly." Swift Arrow helped Celia mount the painted mare he had brought for her. As she settled into the saddle, she caught sight of movement in town, a small group approaching led by Mayor Hargrove and Sheriff Miller. "They've realized what we're doing," she said. Swift Arrow swung easily onto his own horse. "They're too late." As the small procession moved away from the cottage, Dr. Mitchell's wagon leading, followed by Swift Arrow and Celia on horseback, Celia turned for one last look at the town that had defined her for so long. From this distance, Broken Springs seemed smaller somehow, less significant. The future ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she could only begin to imagine. Yet for the first time in decades, Celia felt the exhilaration of charting her own course, rather than merely enduring the one assigned to her. Behind them, the approaching townspeople grew smaller with distance. Before them stretched the vast landscape of mountains and sky, a new horizon beckoning with both danger and promise, and beside her rode the man who had seen her true worth when an entire town had failed to look beyond its own narrow judgments. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall in her own truth, no longer defined by what she lacked, but by what she had found within herself and in the unexpected connection that had transformed both their lives.